I have always believed that the quietest people in any room are often the ones with the most to say. For the better part of a decade, I kept my yacht docked at Harborview Marina, a gleaming 68-foot vessel I had commissioned after 20 years of building a maritime investment portfolio from the ground up. She wasn't a status symbol. She was a product of discipline, patience, and a deep, lifelong love of open water. Every plank, every instrument, every detail below deck had been chosen deliberately. She was, in every meaningful sense, the physical representation of a life's work floating quietly in her slip. The Marina sat at the edge of Pelican Cove Estates, an upscale waterfront community whose HOA had, over the years, developed a reputation for aggressive administration. I was technically a member by virtue of my property in the area, though I attended meetings rarely and engaged in neighborhood politics not at all. I paid what I owed, maintained what was mine, and asked nothing from anyone. That arrangement suited me perfectly, until the letters started arriving. The first notice was almost easy to dismiss. According to the HOA's records, I had failed to pay membership fees for 3 consecutive years. The amount cited was precise, official-looking, and entirely fabricated. I had the payment confirmations to prove it, electronic transfers, bank statements, and stamp receipts going back further than the HOA's own accusation. I set the letter aside, made a call to the administrative office, and expected the matter to dissolve within a week. It did not dissolve. The HOA president, a man named Gareth Colton, had built his tenure on the premise that firm enforcement was a backbone of community standards. He spoke at meetings about accountability, compliance, and the importance of ensuring that no resident, regardless of their standing, operated above the rules. It was compelling rhetoric, and it played well to an audience that valued order. What it concealed was a pattern of selective attention and administrative corner-cutting that his board had apparently never thought to question. When I presented my payment documentation at a scheduled meeting with the HOA's financial office, the reception was not what I anticipated. The staff member across the table reviewed my records briefly, excused herself, and returned with Colton himself. He studied the papers with the careful expression of a man searching for an exit rather than an answer. Then he told me, with remarkable confidence, that their internal records superseded whatever documentation I had brought with me. I left that meeting calmly. My attorney did not. We filed a formal written response within the week, outlining the payment history in precise detail and requesting a written acknowledgement of the error. What arrived instead, over the following month, was an escalating series of enforcement notices, each one more procedurally aggressive than the last, each one citing the same unsubstantiated debt as justification for increasingly severe consequences. Then, on a Wednesday morning in early October, my Marina manager called. He was not a man given to alarm. In 15 years of working together, I had never heard his voice carry the particular quality it carried that morning. I drove to Marina without asking questions. What I found when I arrived removed any need for them. A contracted demolition crew, operating under written authorization from the Pelican Cove Estates HOA, had boarded my yacht in the early hours and begun systematic dismantlement. By the time I reached the dock, the work was well advanced. Equipment that had taken months to source was gone. The hull, which had been structurally perfect at her last survey, had been compromised beyond repair. What had been a magnificent, fully operational vessel that morning was, by afternoon, wreckage. I stood at the edge of the dock for a long moment and said nothing. Then I called my attorney, my financial advisor, and the senior partner at a maritime law firm I had retained years earlier for matters I had hoped would never become relevant. Within the hour, 3 separate legal processes had been initiated. Within the day, a research team was pulling documents that Gareth Colton had almost certainly never considered existed. Here's what they found. 11 years earlier, when Pelican Cove Estates was still being developed and Harborview Marina was little more than a set of engineering plans and a construction timeline, I had purchased the underlying land. Not a slip, not a unit. The land, the actual parcel on which every dock, every fuel station, every storage facility, and every inch of the marina's infrastructure had subsequently been built. The transaction had been recorded with the county on a Tuesday afternoon and had sat in the public property index, entirely undisturbed and entirely unexamined ever since. The Marina operating company that the HOA believed it was dealing with was a licensed tenant. Their lease agreement, a document the HOA had apparently never requested or reviewed, ran through my holding company. The slip fees paid by every vessel owner in that marina, including the HOA's own guest dock arrangements, flowed through an entity I controlled. The utilities running beneath the marina's concrete were connected through easements I had granted. The access road that every resident used to reach the water crossed land that belonged to me. Gareth Colton had authorized the destruction of a yacht on property I owned, under a legal theory that collapsed entirely upon contact with the county parcel map. The formal presentation took place 3 weeks later, in a conference room at a downtown law firm, selected for its neutral ground. The HOA arrived with their attorney and 2 board members. I arrived with a maritime lawyer, a property rights specialist, a forensic financial analyst, and a county-certified title examiner whose sole purpose was to walk every person in the room through the ownership record in language simple enough to leave no ambiguity. The title examiner went first. She placed the parcel map on the conference table, traced the ownership chain from the original land grant forward, and arrived, step by documented step, at my name. She answered every question the HOA's attorney raised with a corresponding document. When the attorney suggested that the marina's operating company held independent land rights, she produced the lease. When he suggested the lease might have lapsed, she produced the renewal. When he suggested there might be a competing claim, she produced a title insurance policy in the absence of any recorded challenge in over a decade. The maritime attorney went second. He outlined with clinical precision the legal exposure created by the unauthorized demolition of a privately owned vessel, not just the replacement value of the yacht itself, but consequential damages, loss of use, the cost of the custom equipment that could not be replaced at any price, and the legal fees accumulating on both sides of the table with every passing day. The financial analyst went last. She presented a single document, a summary of every revenue stream connected to the marina property, slip fees, fuel margins, storage contracts, event hosting, the HOA's own guest dock agreement, and the legal question of what happened to those arrangements once the underlying ownership of the land was formally contested in court. By the time she finished, Gareth Colton looked like a man who had walked confidently into a room and discovered, too late, that the floor was several feet lower than he remembered. Negotiations began that afternoon and continued for 6 weeks. The settlement covered the full replacement value of the yacht, the custom equipment, the documented loss of use during the period of legal proceedings, and a comprehensive restructuring of every agreement connecting the HOA to the marina property. Colton resigned from the board before the ink was dry, not under explicit pressure, but with the particular speed of someone who understands that continued visibility serves no one, least of all himself. The new board reached out to me personally within days of taking over. The conversation was direct, professional, and entirely different in character from anything that had come before. We renegotiated the marina's operating arrangements on terms that were transparent, properly documented, and mutually understood by everyone signing them. The marina remained open. The community retained its access to water. The legal foundation beneath it, however, was no longer something anyone could afford to ignore. A new yacht was commissioned 6 months later, longer than the original, better equipped, and built with a specific knowledge that she would dock in a marina whose ownership would never again be a surprise to anyone. On the morning she arrived at Harborview for the first time, I walked the dock with my marina manager, watching her settle into her slip with the quiet authority of something that belongs exactly where it is. A few residents had gathered at the waterfront, as people tend to do when something worth watching is happening. I don't imagine many of them knew the full story behind the vessel or the water she was floating on, but I did, and the county records did. And in any situation that ultimately matters, that is more than enough.